Box 3 The October Revolution and the Russian Countryside. 2 Views. News of the revolutionary uprising of October 25, 1917, reached the village the following day and was greeted with enthusiasm. To the peasants it meant free land and an end to the war. The day the news arrived, the landowner's manor house was looted, his stock farms were requisitioned, and his vast orchard was cut down and sold to the peasants for wood. All his far buildings were torn down and left in ruins while the land was distributed among the peasants who were prepared to live the new Soviet life. From Fedor Belov, The History of a Soviet Collective Farm. A member of a landowning family wrote to a relative about what happened at the estate. The coup happened quite painlessly, quietly and peacefully. The first days were unbearable. Mikhail Mikhailovich, the estate owner, was calm. The girls also. I must say the chairman behaves correctly and even politely. We were left 2 cows and 2 horses. The servants tell them all the time not to bother us. Let them live. We vouch for their safety and property. We want them treated as humanely as possible. There are rumors that several villages are trying to evict the committees and return the estate to Mikhail Mikhailovich. I don't know if this will happen, or if it's good for us. But we rejoice that there is a conscience in our people. From Serge Schmemann, Echoes of a Native Land. 2 Centuries of a Russian Village, 1997. Read the 2 views on the revolution in the 4.1 The Civil War. When the Bolsheviks ordered land redistribution, the Russian army began to break up. Soldiers, mostly peasants, wished to go home for the redistribution and deserted. Non-Bolshevik socialists, liberals and supporters of autocracy condemned the Bolshevik uprising. Their leaders moved to South Russia and organized troops to fight the Bolsheviks, the Reds. During 1918 and 1919, the Greens, socialist revolutionaries, and Whites, pro-Tsarists, controlled most of the Russian Empire. They were backed by French, American, British and Japanese troops, all those forces who were worried at the growth of socialism in Russia. As these troops and the Bolsheviks fought a civil war, looting, banditry and famine became common. Supporters of private property among whites took harsh steps with peasants who had seized land. Such actions led to the loss of popular support for the non-Bolsheviks. By January 1920, the Bolsheviks controlled most of the former Russian Empire. They succeeded due to cooperation with non-Russian nationalities and Muslim jihadists. Cooperation did not work where Russian colonists themselves turned Bolshevik. In Khiva, in Central Asia, Bolshevik colonists brutally massacred local nationalists in the name of defending socialism. In this situation, many were confused about what the Bolshevik government represented. Partly to remedy this, most non-Russian nationalities were given political autonomy in the Soviet Union, USSR, the state the Bolsheviks created from the Russian Empire in December 1922. But since this was combined with unpopular policies that the Bolsheviks forced the local government to follow, like the harsh discouragement of nomadism, attempts to win over different nationalities were only partly successful. Source B. Central Asia of the October Revolution, 2 views. M. N. Roy was an Indian revolutionary, a founder of the Mexican Communist Party and prominent Comintern leader in India, China and Europe. He was in Central Asia at the time of the Civil War in the 1920s. He wrote, "The chieftain was a benevolent old man, his attendant a youth who spoke Russian. He had heard of the revolution, which had overthrown the Tsar and driven away the generals who conquered the homeland of the Kyrgyz. So, the revolution meant that the Kyrgyz were masters of their home again. Long live the revolution," shouted the Kyrgyz youth who seemed to be a born Bolshevik. The whole tribe joined. M. N. Roy, Memoirs, 1964. The Kyrgyz welcomed the first revolution, i.e. February Revolution, with joy and the second revolution with consternation and terror. This first revolution freed them from the oppression of the Tsarist regime and strengthened their hope that autonomy would be realized. The second revolution, October Revolution, was accompanied by violence, pillage, taxes and the establishment of dictatorial power. Not once a small group of Tsarist bureaucrats oppressed the Kyrgyz. Now the same group of people perpetuate the same regime. Kazakh leader in 1919, quoted in Alexander Benigson and Chantal Kelkage, Les Mouvements Nationaux chez les Musulmans de Russie, 1960. 4.2 Making a socialist society. During the Civil War, the Bolsheviks kept industries and banks nationalized. They permitted peasants to cultivate the land that had been socialized. Bolsheviks used confiscated land to demonstrate what collective work could be. A process of centralized planning was introduced. Officials assessed how the economy could work and set targets for a 5-year period. On this basis they made the 5-year plans. The government fixed all prices to promote industrial growth during the first 2 plans. Box 4 Socialist cultivation in a village in the Ukraine, a commune was set up using 2 confiscated farms as a base. The commune consisted of 13 families with a total of 70 persons. The farm tools taken from the farms were turned over to the commune. The members ate in a communal dining hall and income was divided in accordance with the principles of cooperative communism. The entire proceeds of the members' labor, as well as all dwellings and facilities belonging to the commune, were shared by the commune members. Fedor Belov, The History of a Soviet Collective Farm, 1955. 1927 to 1932 and 1933 to 1938. Centralized planning led to economic growth. Industrial production increased, between 1929 and 1933 by 100% in the case of oil, coal and steel. New factory cities came into being. However, rapid construction led to poor working conditions. In the city of Magnitogorsk, the construction of a steel plant was achieved in 3 years. Workers lived hard lives and the result was 550 stoppages of work in the first year alone. In living quarters, in the wintertime, at 40 degrees below, people had to climb down from the 4th floor and dash across the street in order to go to the toilet. An extended schooling system developed, and arrangements were made for factory workers and peasants to enter universities. Creches were established in factories for the children of women workers. Cheap public health care was provided. Model living quarters were set up for workers. The effect of all this was uneven, though, since government resources were limited. Source: See Dreams and Realities of a Soviet Childhood in 1933. Dear grandfather Kalinin, my family is large, there are 4 children. We don't have a father, he died, fighting for the workers' cause, and my mother is ailing. I want to study very much, but I cannot go to school. I had some old boots, but they are completely torn and no one can mend them. My mother is sick, we have no money and no bread, but I want to study very much. There stands before us the task of studying, studying and studying. That is what Vladimir Ilyich Lenin said. But I have to stop going to school. We have no relatives and there is no one to help us, so I have to go to work in a factory, to prevent the family from starving. Dear grandfather, I am 13, I study well and have no bad reports. I am in class 5. Letter of 1933 from a 13-year-old worker to Kalinin, Soviet president from V. Sokolov, ed. Obshtestvo I Vlast, V. 1930 Yegodi, Moscow, 1997. 4.3 Stalinism and collectivization. The period of the early planned economy was linked to the disasters of the collectivization of agriculture. By 1927-1928, the towns in Soviet Russia were facing an acute problem of grain supplies. The government fixed prices at which grain must be sold, but the peasants refused to sell their grain to government buyers at these prices. Stalin, who headed the party after the death of Lenin, introduced firm emergency measures. He believed that rich peasants and traders in the countryside were holding stocks in the hope of higher prices. Speculation had to be stopped and supplies confiscated. In 1928, party members toured the grain-producing areas, supervising enforced grain collections, and raiding kulaks, the name for well-to-do peasants. As shortages continued, the decision was taken to collectivize farms. It was argued that grain shortages were partly due to the small size of holdings. After 1917, land had been given over to peasants. These small-sized peasant farms could not be modernized. To develop modern farms and run them along industrial lines with machinery, it was necessary to eliminate kulaks, take away land from peasants, and establish state-controlled large farms. What followed was Stalin's collectivization program. From 1929, the party forced all peasants to cultivate in collective farms, kolkhoz. The bulk of land and implements were transferred to the ownership of collective farms. Peasants worked on the land and the kolkhoz profit was shared. Enraged peasants resisted the authorities and destroyed their livestock. Between 1929 and 1931, the number of cattle fell by 1/3. Those who resisted collectivization were severely punished. Many were deported and exiled. As they resisted collectivization, peasants argued that they were not rich and they were not against socialism. They merely did not want to work in collective farms for a variety of reasons. Stalin's government allowed some independent cultivation, but treated such cultivators unsympathetically. In spite of collectivization, production did not increase immediately. In fact, the bad harvests of 1930 to 1933 led to one of most devastating famines in Soviet history when over 4 million died. Source D. Official view of the opposition to collectivization and the government response. From the second half of February of this year, in various regions of the Ukraine, mass insurrections of the peasantry have taken place, caused by distortions of the party's line by a section of the lower ranks of the party and the Soviet apparatus in the course of the introduction of collectivization and preparatory work for the spring harvest. Within a short time, large-scale activities from the above-mentioned regions carried over into neighboring areas have taken place near the border. And the most aggressive insurrections. The greater part of the peasant insurrections have been linked with outright demands for the return of collectivized stocks of grain, livestock and tools. Between the 1st of February and the 15th of March, 25,000 have been arrested. 656 have been executed, 3,673 have been imprisoned in labor camps and 5,580 exiled. Report of K.M. Carlson, President of the State Police Administration of the Ukraine to the Central Committee of the Communist Party, on the 19th of March 1930. From V. Sokolov, ed. Obshtestvo I Vlast, v. 1930 Yegodi. Many within the party criticized the confusion in industrial production under the planned economy and the consequences of collectivization. Stalin and his sympathizers charged these critics with conspiracy against socialism. Accusations were made throughout the country, and by 1939, over 2 million were in prisons or labor camps. Most were innocent of the crimes, but no one spoke for them. A large number were forced to make false confessions under torture and were executed. Several among them were talented professionals. See, this is a letter written by a peasant who did not want to join the collective farm. To the newspaper Krestinskaya Gazeta, peasant newspaper. I am a natural working peasant born in 1879. There are 6 members in my family. My wife was born in 1881. My son is 16, 2 daughters 19. All 3 go to school. My sister is 71. From 1932, heavy taxes have been levied on me that I have found impossible. From 1935, local authorities have increased the taxes on me, and I was unable to handle them, and all my property was registered. My horse, cow, calf, sheep with lambs, all my implements, furniture and my reserve of wood for repair of buildings, and they sold the lot for the taxes. In 1936, they sold 2 of my buildings. The kolkhoz bought them. In 1937, of 2 huts I had, 1 was sold and 1 was confiscated. Afanasy Dedorovich Frebenev, an independent cultivator from V. Sokolov, ed. Obshtestvo I Vlast, v. 1930 Yegodi,